I think I want to make a dining table. So, I have a problem in that the dining table I currently have was never really intended to be a dining table. It's a tiny table, maybe 30 inches in diameter, that I made as kind of a breakfast nook table or a temporary table for the studio apartment I used to live in. And it was great, it's wonderful, I love that piece. However, it's not an appropriate size for a dining table. And now that I live in a little bit larger space, not a very large space, but certainly larger than a studio apartment, I've invited people over and they always just kind of laugh at the absurd nature of having this tiny single person table. I'm going to make a table that fits the space that I have. And so I have this beautiful cherry slab that I picked up some months ago with the intention of turning it into a dining table for this house specifically. But the first thing I need to do is fill some of the checks and voids in that slab. So let's do that. Now I admit, one of our favorite things to do as furniture makers is to kind of mock the epoxy pour fad. I'm not a fan of river tables myself, but epoxy does have a place in furniture, and especially in this application, I've used this a number of times and it always looks excellent. Sometimes there are voids and checks in a piece of wood that you need to stabilize in order to make it usable, and it's just too beautiful a piece to pass up on. So in that case, I'll fill those checks and voids with black epoxy. All right, now it's been a couple of days and you can see that the epoxy has cured completely. I was able to sand it down flush, but I have a little bit of staining happening around where I did the pour to fill the void, and that's due to the colorant that I put in the epoxy that has seeped into the pores. Now I could sand that down by hand, but much more efficient to take this to a wide belt sander, and luckily I have a friend, Brian Bolin, who's gonna allow me to do just that. So let's take a field trip. Oh yeah. It's the cabinet maker's Prius, baby. Nothing it can't do. By the way, I think this is Violet Beauregard's first appearance on the channel. Welcome. You know, I just want to say, everybody thinks you need a truck to be a furniture maker. This is a Prius. I've been driving this Prius for, what, 6 years? I've got an 8-foot by 30-inch slab in here. I just did a big box store run yesterday. Got 25 studs in here. I have fit 110 board feet of white oak in this vehicle and still been able to function. So, I'm not saying it's ideal. I'm not saying it's the most convenient vehicle. All I'm saying is people come up with excuses for not making things all the time, and not having a truck is one of them. You can get creative. You can get creative. That's all I'm saying.
And so begins the process of lumber selection.
Now, this isn't a thing that most folks consider early on in their woodworking journey, and that's fair. That's totally reasonable. The first thing you should learn to do is to build. However, once you hit that intermediate level, really paying attention to grain selection is a great way to advance your design skills to another level. Now you can see I've got this kind of roughly mapped out which components I want to take out of where. And the thing that I'm mostly paying attention to is the grain pattern and how that will be centered on the component. Whether that's going to have an upward arc or a downward arc, and whether or not it will feel visually balanced. In this particular instance, I'm taking one of the legs for the bench out of this component. I know that I can center that component on this cathedral grain so it'll feel balanced. If that piece was here, it would feel really awkward and unintentional. And our goal is to have everything be very quiet and subtle and intentional so that it feels like a professional made it. Yeah. Got a new camera. I know I'm switching cameras in the middle of this video, but maybe it's a good opportunity to play with the new one and get to know it. Well, I don't know. We will find out. What I've got going on here is I need to make the templates for the foot of the table, of the bench, and the leg, so that I can get to cutting joinery. So I'm going to break out the Shaper Origin in order to make these templates. You can make them by hand, but because I already drew these up in CAD, this is just a very convenient way to knock out really accurate templates really quickly. I could cut these parts out on the Shaper itself, but the pieces are about 2 inches thick, and that's really pushing the limits of what the Shaper can do. So I'm just going to make the template, and then I'm going to hand shape them. So I needed to cut the half lap in here because this is where the stretcher is going to go in the actual table to hold the trestle base together. So I decided to do that before I actually shaped the leg for obvious reasons, right? To cut a parallel half lap in here is going to be a lot easier when the piece is square than it is when the piece is angled, and I kind of have to balance it a little bit like that.
Progress has been made, my joinery is all done, everything is looking good. And now it's time to make decisions about shaping, right? So looking at this form that I've created, it looks a little bit angular to me. It's just a little bit harsh on the eyes. So what I think I'm gonna do is just add some light curvature to the uprights. That's it, very minimal, almost imperceptible, just enough to make that line flow a little bit more gracefully. And then I can come in with hand tools and I can detail those edge profiles, give it some movement, give it some dynamism, and more interesting things can happen than just kind of this blocky form. I don't want it to be eye-catching. I don't want it to be exaggerated or overly graceful, if that's a way to phrase that, because this needs to sit below the tabletop and the slab needs to be the center of attention. This almost needs to disappear into the background, but this being so angular and blocky does contrast the live edge of the tabletop, so that's why I'm gonna add a couple of minor curves. So just a little bit to the stretcher, a little bit to the legs, and then a little bit to the header, which should give us a nice, graceful, softer visual palette for the base itself. So let's do that. Well, here's a fun little joint that's sure to upset the internet. This is the header for the bench I'm making to go with the table I'm making, and I've had this 3-degree kind of V-cut in here in order to give the seat just a little bit of movement because I don't think flat benches are that comfortable. In order to make that happen, to where I could still do this joinery easily and accurately, all I did was cut these two pieces at 3 degrees, and I'm gonna join them together. Now, of course, this is 2 end grain pieces. End grain doesn't like to glue to end grain. I get that. This is where the internet's gonna get upset. So what I've done is I've added a tiny domino in here for 2 reasons. Number 1, to give me a little bit of long grain to long grain glue contact. And number 2, and if I'm honest, more importantly, to just help with alignment as I glue this up, because you can see that gluing this up is a little bit weird. Now I'm using Titebond's Quick and Thick in order to glue this end grain to end grain situation. This is thicker, obviously, than normal Titebond 1, so it does the job on end grain quite nicely. Just wanted to address that before all of the people are in the You know what? Drop a comment down there anyway. That's always good for engagement. I'm gonna get back to building things. I've got a table. Before we go, I just want to take one last look at this thing because the sunlight is just so much better in here. Just the chatoyance on this slab is beautiful. The grain, the depth of color, the way the slab up top is a little bit darker than the cherry on the bottom, and it just kind of accentuates the natural visual beauty of that piece of wood. It really is a delightful thing, and it's a thing to behold. And that has nothing to do with my skill as a woodworker or my education as a designer. That is just taking a step back and allowing the material itself to be the central focus of the piece. It's a beautiful thing. All right. Now we can go bring the thing home. Cabinet maker's Prius strikes again.